Welcome everyone to the Rural Clean Energy Federal Funding Fair. Additional funding opportunities for clean energy projects with the Department of Energy and USDA Rural Development. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Alex Anderson. Alex?
Thank you, Scott. Welcome again to today's Rural Clean Energy Funding Fair. As many of you may know, rural development has recently closed the New ERA and PACE funding opportunities. But we wanted to take this opportunity to continue to share information about other funding sources for your potential energy projects. Our Rural Clean Energy Funding Fair is a chance to share more about specific updates and details regarding eligibility and applicable projects for a number of programs across our agency partners. So you'll be hearing presentations from U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Treasury, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as more program opportunities here at Rural Development. So we're going to start our webinar today with Ted Toon, Senior Advisor for...
I'm sorry, Alex, this is Scott again. If you don't mind, we actually just got joined by Chris McLean. If he wants to briefly do some opening remarks for us before we get started, would that be okay?
Yes, that would be great. Chris, if you don't mind coming on camera and...
I don't mind at all. Thank you very much and welcome to the Rural Clean Energy Federal Funding Fair. This is a very important event for us. We have received so many good letters of interest applying for the PACE, the Powering Affordable Clean Energy program, and the new Empowering Rural America program, New ERA. And unfortunately, there were so many good projects, we ran out of money before we could get to all of the good projects out there. And we don't want anybody to give up on their creativity, their great ideas for clean energy. And we wanted to be able, with some particular attention to those who applied to the PACE and New ERA programs, bring to your attention other funding opportunities that are available to you. And we want to be able to work with you as possible across the federal family to be able to make your clean energy visions come true. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And on behalf of the Rural Utility Service, I welcome all of our federal colleagues to be able to talk to their programs. And at the very end, I'll get to talk a little bit more about the RUS Standing Electric Loan Program. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, we'll start with Ted Toon, Senior Advisor for Building Decarbonization and Finance at U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He'll talk to us more about Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and their various programs. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Hello. Thank you, Alex and Chris and Scott. Great to be here with you. Thank you also for your partnership over the last year and a half as we designed and launched the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. What I plan to do today is to walk through at a fairly high level the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is EPA's Inflation Reduction Act funded program. We recently, just within the past 6 weeks, have made announcements about the selectees under our competitive program, and I'll talk about that in more detail. And we'll talk specifically about some of the opportunities that we see for rural America, which is such an important piece of not only serving Americans, but also of the climate agenda and the climate solutions. So really looking forward to today's discussion. We can jump to the next slide, please. Some very quick background. I won't cover all of this, but the Inflation Reduction Act did come out of or did include the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund at $27 billion. It is the largest non-tax provision of the IRA, and it's the largest climate investment that we've made in the history of this country. It is really intended to be a bold investment in the future to improve health conditions and health outcomes, lower energy costs for Americans across the country, and ultimately, as the name suggests, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We went through a robust public hearing process to get the best thinking from stakeholders across the country. Thank you to those of you who participated in that process. And we took all of that into consideration as we rolled out the program last year. Next slide, please. So the objectives for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund are these three. First, of course, is reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases and other air pollutants. That comes directly from the statute. And there we have tied our goals to the administration's broader goals about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, at least 50% by 2030. The second goal here is delivering benefits to American communities, especially low-income and disadvantaged communities. We'll talk more about exactly how we define low-income and disadvantaged communities, but of this $27 billion, about more than 70% will be directed toward low-income communities, far exceeding the Justice 40 targets. The third objective for the program is to mobilize financing and private capital to stimulate additional deployment. So while $27 billion is an enormous amount of money, when you think about 50 states and territories and tribal lands all competing for that money, and you think about all sectors of the economy that could benefit from emissions reductions projects, that money gets spread out pretty quickly. So the idea here is to leverage this and to bring in private capital. And in fact, our applicants, now our selectees under this program, have pledged to bring in considerable additional capital so that we can extend and expand the impact this program has. Next slide, please. So we broke the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund into three distinct programs. These work together and they're intended to be complementary, but they are quite distinct programs. Starting on the left, we have the National Clean Investment Fund. Under this program, we selected three national nonprofits to administer this program for us. This totals nearly $14 billion. This program will be focused on financing at scale, really catalyzing tens of thousands of clean technology projects across the country. The second program in the middle of the screen is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. This is a $6 billion program. Here we have selected 5 hub nonprofits, and we call them hub nonprofits because this funding is a pass-through program. 90% of the funding that those 5 nonprofits receive has to be passed through to community lenders. These are the financial institutions that are already in the communities doing work. Credit unions, community development finance institutions, CDFIs, green banks, minority depository institutions, other organizations that already have a presence in communities and are already building relationships in the communities. The third program, back one, there you go. The third program on the right is the Solar for All program. Here we have selected 60 entities to be our to administer the program for us. This totals $7 billion, and this, as the name implies, is all about deploying solar, rooftop solar, community solar storage, and related upgrades that are necessary to properties to support the solar. By selecting 60 entities here to work with us, we've ensured coverage across all states and territories. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, more than 70% of the $27 billion will benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities. I think it's important to highlight for a moment the definition that we use for low-income and disadvantaged communities. There are so many various definitions out there. For the purposes of this program, there are 4 different pathways, any one of which can get an entity, whether it's a family, a household, a small business, a community organization, or other type of entity, to make them eligible for financing under this program. Those 4 pathways are laid out here on this slide. The first 2 are mapping tools. The Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is a tool that the White House Council on Environmental Quality put out about 2 years ago. Again, this is a mapping tool. If you put in an address, or you can just zoom into a location by census tract, this overlays demographic data about income with a number of environmental factors. And if in fact it's low income and has one of these environmental factors present, it is identified as low income and disadvantaged. In addition to that, there are some additional communities that are picked up through EPA's own mapping tool, which is called EJ Screen. So those two, again, are mapping tools. They're publicly available. They're free. Anyone can go on and look at them to see if a particular address or town or county or census tract meets one of these requirements. The second two criterion here, either of which can make an entity eligible for participation here. The first is low-income individuals and households, and this is strictly based on the income of that individual or household, typically tied to the area median income or the federal poverty line, which are metrics that are very often used for numerous programs. We also named multiple other programs such that a family that's participating in one program where they have to be income qualified, for example, will not have to be requalified here simply by acceptance and participation in one, they would be eligible to participate here. The fourth category is affordable housing. So this is any property that is serving as affordable housing, and there are criteria in our notices of funding opportunity defining exactly what that means. But essentially, if the rents that are being offered are affordable to low-income people in that community, it qualifies, including a number of programs. Some of the programs you see listed here, properties that are participating in these programs would be eligible to participate in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as well. More detail about these in the notice of funding opportunities, but again, multiple pathways to be eligible as a low-income disadvantaged community for participation in this program. Next slide, please. So under the first two programs that I mentioned, the National Clean Investment Fund and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, these are the 8 entities, 3 plus 5 that I mentioned we've selected to administer the program on our behalf. You see the names and the amounts that they have been nominally funded here on the screen. There is on our website a lot more information about these entities, including the narrative section of their applications that describes in more detail exactly what each of them is proposing to do. So I would highly recommend you look at those applications and those narratives, because it describes the types of communities and the types of projects that they intend to work in. Each of these entities is slightly different and is coming at it from a slightly different angle. I think when you put them all together, it's a really powerful portfolio of entities that will be administering this program. But they each have a very different focus. Some of them have specifically called out rural areas and serving rural communities. So again, would call your attention to those on our website. Next slide, please. I won't read through the details here, but this is a little more description about each of those entities that has been selected under our programs. Climate United Fund here is a consortium of Calvert Impact along with Community Preservation Corporation. The second is Coalition for Green Capital. The third is Power Forward Communities, a coalition of enterprise community partners, an organization called LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, Rewiring America, Habitat for Humanity, and United Way. So again, more detail on our website about each of these. This is just a very high-level description of who these entities are. Next slide, please. Under the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, I mentioned there are 5 nonprofit hubs. These are the entities that will be doing this work for us. Opportunity Finance Network, who is largely working with CDFIs, Community Development Finance Institutions around the country to do this work. Inclusive, who is an entity that works directly with credit unions. Justice Climate Fund is working across a network of community lenders. Appalachian Community Capital, who has a specific focus on energy communities, rural communities, and areas in Appalachia as well. And then the Native CDFI Network, who is working, as the name indicates, with Native CDFIs to serve tribal lands. Next slide, please. So what kinds of projects can be funded? Again, the notices of funding opportunity that we have posted on our website give a lot of detail about that. And the narrative section of the applications, which are also posted, give a lot more detail about exactly what these selected entities intend to do. They are finalizing those plans now. We are in the process of finalizing the grant agreements with each of those entities, which we have hope to have done by July. Once those are done, we will have a lot more detail to share. But in the interim, those narratives are very, very instructive about what they intend. But I will highlight for you today that within those first two programs, National Clean Investment Fund and Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, we did call out three what we called priority project categories. These are project types that we think can have significant impact and that can be readily financeable. The first is distributed energy generation and storage. So that's things like solar and wind and geothermal and other projects that generate electricity in our zero emissions projects. So a whole class of projects fit into that category. The second category is net zero emissions buildings. This is both the construction of new buildings to a net zero standard or the substantial energy rehabilitation of existing buildings, because we know there are buildings across the country that need energy upgrades. The third category here is zero emissions transportation. So this is anything from replacing fleets of vehicles, delivery vehicles, school buses, things like that, but also charging stations and micro mobility and other strategies that are consistent with the National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization, which has a lot of strategies for approaching this sector. Those are the three priority sectors that those 8 entities I introduced a few moments ago will be focused on. I can tell you from having read all of those applications that about half, maybe more than half of the funding is proposed to go into the buildings sector. So the center category here on this slide, but the others are well represented in those work plans as well. Next slide, please. So I certainly will not read all the detail on this slide, but I do want to call your attention to this detail, all of which comes directly from the Notice of Funding Opportunity. This lays out both what we mean when we say financial assistance, and I will tell you that under those first two programs, those are intended to be loan programs. They are not grant programs. They are loan programs. However, the entities that we've selected have some broad discretion in the types of loan products they put out. So a lot more detail there about debt and lines of credit and loans, forgivable loans, zero interest or below market rate interest loans. They have broad discretion on the types of programs and products they put out to best meet the needs of their communities. There's also a lot more detail about a qualified project and what is considered under this program a qualified project, essentially projects that will lower greenhouse gas emissions, that have the community benefits or individual benefits that we described. We want to make sure that these are commercially viable technologies that we're putting out, et cetera. So more detail both on this slide and in the Notice of Funding Opportunity on precisely what we mean by a qualified project. Next slide, please. I want to turn to the third program now, the Solar for All program. Again, $7 billion in total. Just a few weeks ago on Earth Day, we announced the 60 selectees for this program. We made 5 what we called multi-state awards. So these were entities that were proposing to do something that crossed state lines. We awarded also, or we have selected 6 entities to serve tribal entities and tribal lands, and then 49 entities to serve state level awards. These are sometimes the state energy office or a state low income program that may already exist or that was created specifically for this program. I believe of those 49 state level awards, I believe 36 of them went to state entities, either the energy office or the solar office or renewable energy office. And others went to either a municipality that is serving the entire state or a nonprofit entity that is proposed to serve that state. So between those three types of awards, again, $7 billion, 60 awardees. Too many to list on a slide, but our website includes a full list of all of those, so you can go on to see who is serving or will be serving your state or your locality on our website. We have asked all of those selectees to go back and update their work plans. We partially funded them. We didn't have as much funding as was requested. Seems to be a problem, as Chris described with some of the USDA grant programs as well. So we've asked them to revise their work plans. As soon as those are done, we'll be posting those publicly to our website as well, so that you'll be able to see exactly what the entity serving your state or location is proposing to do with the funds that they will be awarded. So again, look on the website to see who's serving your area. Across the Solar for All program and across the selectees there, more than 900,000 households, close to 1 million households are anticipated to be served. What I'll tell you about the Solar for All program is that it has to have a residential connection. So either the solar panels and the storage, the battery storage backup, that either needs to be located on a residential property, whether it's a single family home or a mobile home or a multifamily apartment property or affordable housing property. Either the solar panels and the storage has to be on a residential property, or in the case of community solar, there are examples where the solar array, the panels get put up, for example, on the roof of a church or a house of worship. But the benefits of that, the financial benefits of the energy generated there, flows to affordable housing properties or low-income residents in that community. So there has to be a tie-in to the residents in some way, either the panels or the benefits of a community array that's set up somewhere else. So key takeaways here. I know there's a lot of information. 3 distinct programs here, as I quickly described to you. We hope to have all of our grant agreements fully executed by this summer, by July. That's the point at which our selectees become grantees, and that's the point at which they can begin drawing funds and doing the work that they have proposed. The $27 billion, as I mentioned, will be leveraged. Will be leveraged several times by bringing in private capital, blending those funds and putting that out so that we can expand to this work. The 2 programs, National Clean Investment Fund and Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, are primarily loan programs, as I described. The Solar for All, that will vary greatly. All 3 programs have a technical assistance component. This can help individuals, communities, et cetera, do things like site assessments and some of the permitting work and other things that might need to be done in order to allow the actual energy project to occur. As I mentioned, there's a significant low-income disadvantaged communities focus across the 3 programs. And again, buildings and residential properties make up a majority of those 3 programs. So I'm going to stop there in the interest of time. Thank you for your attention. I know there's a ton of information here and a lot more on our website. And then again, once we have the grant agreements finalized, we'll have a lot more information, including, we hope, an interactive map showing who's doing what in what locations. We will pause there and take time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you all for adding your questions to the Q&A chat. For very specific questions about individual projects, we'll pass that along to our presenters at the end of this presentation. We'll be sure to follow up on those specific questions. And for more general questions, we may wait till the end of all presentations so that we can pose them to all presenters. So we'll start with this first question. Ted, can you provide any details on the planned technical assistance that will be available to GGRF awardees in their communities?
Sure. So the technical assistance looks a little different in each of the 3 programs as it needs to. For example, under the Solar for All program, up to 25% of the awards that are being given to these entities can go towards technical assistance. That can be everything from market building and just education of people about the opportunity and about the benefits of the opportunity. But it also can be some of the things that can be barriers to people participating in a program like this. So it could be things like doing a solar assessment to see if it even makes sense on your property. It can be doing some of the siting and permitting and contracting work that needs to be done. It can help with all of those things at the front end. Under the other two programs, the technical assistance could be things like market building, again, educating the community about the opportunities, and also doing some of the front end assessments. So again, maybe energy audits or things like that to determine what is needed at a property and make it more energy efficient. Some of those things can be included as well. So again, it's different in each of the programs, but there is a significant amount of technical assistance that should be available flowing through those intermediary organizations to the marketplace to help really build a robust pipeline of projects that meet the criteria.
Thank you, Ted. One more question before moving on to our next presentation. When you say finance climate and clean energy projects, are these programs essentially just low-cost loans, or are grants also involved?
So they are generally not grants. They are generally loans, especially under the National Clean Investment Fund and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. They are generally loans. As I mentioned, those selectees are the grantees that we'll be working with have discretion about the types of loan products they put out. So they can be forgivable loans or partially forgivable loans. They can be low interest or zero interest loans. Again, they have been challenged to create the products that are going to best serve their communities. So those are generally loan programs. However, the Solar for All will generally be loan programs. And again, because there are 60 entities that we've selected there, each of whom has a very different proposal for how they're going to do that work. There may be some grants involved there, but it's generally a loan program as well.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate your time, appreciate your presentation. And again, for all those where we haven't been able to answer your questions quite yet, there will be other opportunities to either follow up after this session or at the end of all of our presentations. Thanks
Great. Thanks so much.
So our next presentation is coming from Department of Energy, Tanika Hay from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations.
Good afternoon. I'm Tanika Hay, Stakeholder Engagement Lead for the IRA program at the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OCED. And thank you again for the invitation to share more about OCED's energy improvements in rural or remote areas program. So you'll hear me refer to it as ERA or ERA. We'll talk more about the projects that were most recently selected. Next slide. As many of you know, the rural and remote communities here are facing a lot of unique challenges like geographic isolation, disproportionate high energy costs, the low power grid reliability. 84% of households without reliable energy access in the U.S. live in rural areas. So this ERA program is designed to address that distinct set of energy challenges that communities with less than 10,000 people face. So on April 30th, OCED announced $78 million for the 19 community-driven projects across 12 states and 13 tribal nations. These projects will help cut energy costs, enhance climate resiliency, and support the local economic development. So these are a diverse set of projects. As you'll hear, I'll go into more detail. 5 of them, you're using microgrids to displace the use of diesel fuel, reducing costs, greenhouse gas emissions, and the risk of fuel spills from transporting fuel across the ecosystems of Alaska. 4 transmission and distribution projects help to improve energy reliability, increasing capacity for future renewables, and reducing environmental and health impacts for their communities. But all of these projects will create more affordable, reliable energy sources, lowering energy bills, and are replicable and scalable so that other communities may be able to access their benefits in the future. Next slide. So OSED was established in December of 2021 by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, more commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill, to scale the clean energy technologies needed to tackle some of our most pressing climate challenges. So OSED's mission is to deliver clean energy demonstration projects at scale and in partnership with the private sector to accelerate deployment, market adoption, and the equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. So a key part of that is just to ensure that there's an equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. We really want to invest in projects in the safest, most transparent way possible. And community input not only shapes the specific projects that OSED funds, but it really does shape our approach to building out the clean energy industry. Next slide. So the bipartisan infrastructure law authorized the Department of Energy to invest $1 billion in energy improvements in rural and remote areas. So this ERA program is managed by our office, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And the purpose of that program is to provide financial assistance in rural and remote areas of the United States to improve their resilience, safety, reliability, and availability of energy and environmental protection from adverse impacts of energy generation. So the goals of the program are really to deliver measurable benefits to energy customers in rural and remote areas, to support new rural or remote energy system models, and to build clean energy knowledge, capacity, and self-reliance in rural America. Next slide. You can skip ahead to the next slide. So before I jump into the most recent announcement, I just wanted to share about the $300 million funding opportunity that was announced, or that announced selectees earlier this year. So that opportunity to increase energy affordability and to promote client resilience has an anticipated federal cost share ranging from $5 to $100 million, which is up to 50% per project. So that funding is flexible to meet various project types, with $5 million to $10 million for a single site demonstration project and up to $100 million for a single or multi-site demonstration project that benefits multiple communities. So this program aids to fund clean energy projects with 3 goals. As you can see on the side, it's to use clean energy technologies that will improve reliability or resilience of energy systems, to reduce energy poverty, and to improve environmental performance of energy generation in rural or remote communities. And so throughout that process, we received early on in the process 365 concept paper submittals and from all across the country. From that, we encouraged 78 concept papers to submit full applications. And in February, OSED selected 17 of those projects for award negotiations. And that's really a breadth of diversity of clean energy technologies that were shown across those projects. Next slide. So in May of last year, OSED announced $50 million grant funding opportunity for ERA for small community-driven projects. So this FOA was in response from the feedback that we received from communities So with that feedback, the program reduced barriers to federal funding by simplifying the application process, removing the cost share requirement, offered technical assistance, and reduced financial reporting requirements. And again, this was in direct response to feedback that we received from sessions, even sessions like these and others that we held ahead of designing this specific funding opportunity. For the first stage of the process, we received an overwhelming 659 pre-application submittals. And from that, we invited 59 to submit full applications. And 19 of those projects were selected for a note award negotiation. So because of the amazing quality of applications we received, we were able to increase the funding from what was originally announced from the $50 to $78 million, just so we could fund a greater number and variety of these projects. Next slide. So this hard to read slide is just to show you the array of different technologies that are employed in these projects. And so the goal was just to address the unique challenges in rural and remote communities that by deploying a range of clean energy technologies. So several of these projects will be using multiple technologies that include solar PV technology, which is one of the fastest growing and most affordable sources of new electricity, grid improvements through upgraded high capacity electric transmission lines to modernize the resilience of the grid, microgrids. There are the localized electric grids that can disconnect from the main grid to operate autonomously to strengthen grid resilience and help mitigate grid disturbances. And energy efficiency upgrades that can promote increased comfort for homeowners and lower operating costs for businesses. So the potential impacts of the projects selected here will support diverse, replicable, clean energy technologies, improve access and energy resilience, lower the energy bill burden in reducing GHG emissions, develop the rural remote workforce, and empower rural remote communities. Next slide, please. So of those 19 projects, they're geographically diverse. So here on the map, you can see where those proposed projects will be located. And I'll go into more detail so you'll hear specifically where. Next slide. And this is just a deeper look at the project selected across Alaska, which exemplifies how the AIR program will support some of our country's most remote communities. Next slide. Each AIR project was required to develop a community benefits plan to ensure that local communities and workers are engaged in the projects from the outset so that concrete benefits are identified. So OSED will provide robust project management oversight of the community benefits implementation throughout the project lifecycle. Next slide. So here you can see the 4 pillars of our community benefits plan, including community and labor engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, investing in the American workforce, and the Justice 40 initiative. So OSED's engagement with communities will kick off during negotiations, and that's kind of the space where we are now, where we're working with selectees to strengthen their community benefits and incorporate additional input. More importantly, community benefits commitments are meant to be adaptable. So as the project progresses and lessons are learned and we're receiving community input, we'll continue to review those commitments. Next slide. So with that, I'll just transition now into the projects. And you can find more information about each of those projects on our IRA website, and we'll have someone drop that website in the chat for you. So the first project, Adams Electric Cooperative Green Energy Project, will install 1 megawatt of wind turbine and 1 megawatt solar PV array to eliminate more than 40,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions each year. So this project is expected to reduce energy costs by more than $200,000 annually for the 7,500 rural families who are members of the cooperative in 7 remote Illinois counties, and reinvigorate disadvantaged communities affected by mine closures. Next slide. So clean energy and efficiency for Dallas County, Alabama schools project. The Dallas County, Alabama Board of Education seeks to retrofit approximately 9 schools across the district, many of which were constructed in the 1950s. Here they'll upgrade HVAC units, lighting systems, and building controls with smart, energy efficient technologies. 3 of these schools could receive 353 kilowatts of rooftop solar PV, directly generating energy for their facilities. And this project will impact students from the historic Selma, Alabama's surrounding communities as well. Next slide. A cost-effective and equitable cooperative community solar in Western Maine project seeks to install 150 kilowatt solar PV arrays at 6 sites across Western Maine to reduce energy costs for consumer and worker-owned cooperative members. So at least 50 of these project beneficiaries are low-income households, and the project expects to reduce electricity costs between 20 and 40%. Next slide. Decarbonizing the Tongass with tribally owned heat pumps project here is situated in the middle of one of the largest temperate rainforests in the world, and one of the Earth's last old growth forests. Prince of Wales Island is a remote location only accessible seasonably, and then only by bush plane or ferry. So this project plans to install air source heat pumps in approximately 240 tribal buildings to help reduce residents' energy resilience on and emissions from fossil fuel use. So this tribal-owned project will be powered by existing clean hydroelectric resources, offering affordable rates to residents. Next slide, please. The East Central Community College Solar and Lighting Upgrades project plans to meet peak energy demands. The East Central Community College aims to install 1 megawatt of solar PV to serve 38 campus facilities and upgrade 25 facilities with energy efficient LED lighting. So this integrated project will expect to reduce the college's annual energy costs by $170,000. The college is also developing one of the first community college solar installation and maintenance curricula in the state of Mississippi. Next slide, please. Green Care Empowering Resilience in Poteau project is located near Tornado Valley. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma's Poteau campus has averaged 3 outages per year since 2018 due to severe storms. So this project will create a microgrid with 2.1 megawatt hours of battery energy storage systems that will provide backup power during outages for a health clinic, the Child Development Center, and food distribution center. So this project aims to upgrade 7 buildings with efficient LED fixtures and energy management systems that will save about $140,000 in electricity costs each year. Next slide. Grid access and resiliency for unserved rural and indigenous people project aims to extend the underground electric distribution lines 30 miles into areas of Northwest Washington classified as disadvantaged by the climate and economic justice screening tool that you learned about earlier. By upgrading the Strauss substation between 135 and 190 unserved homes will have access to electric service for the first time. So providing this first-time grid access will not only reduce local dependence on harmful diesel generators, but households will have power for modern necessities like heating and cooling, refrigeration, lighting, and access to the internet, which can increase the overall economic opportunity in the area. Next slide, please. High penetration solar battery project in Ambler, Alaska is located about 45 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and 27% of the residents in this traditional village live below the poverty line. So this project aims to upgrade an existing power plant to allow for 400 kilowatt solar PV system and a 500 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system. So the village plans to own and operate the renewable generating assets, producing nearly a quarter of the community's electricity. So once this one is fully integrated and set up, the clean energy system will increase the resilience of that islanded microgrid and decrease diesel use by more than 20,000 gallons annually. So this will allow the village's diesel generators to be turned off for the first time in over 40 years. So we're excited about that. Next slide, please. The Kakanat Paradigm Shift project, like many villages, as I described earlier in Alaska, are only accessible by boat and plane. About 170 of the indigenous residents use diesel to supplement other power sources. So this project will upgrade Kakanat's microgrid with 943 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system and a solar PV, wind turbine, and electric thermal storage heating units. So with those upgrades, this project plans to significantly increase the microgrid's reliability, resilience, displacing 70% or more of its fossil fuel use in the first 2 years, and allowing for scaling to meet the anticipated demand driven by population growth, electric vehicle use, and more prevalent heat pumps. Next slide, please. The Lake City Area Power and Resiliency Augmentation Enterprise Project. During the last 2 years, this area of rural Colorado experienced 76 outages due to extreme weather and wildfires, including a 28-hour outage during sub-zero overnight temperatures. So this project plans to replace 30 miles of aged overhead electric distribution lines, enhancing the local grid resilience while reducing operational and maintenance costs. So these upgrades will also prevent additional fires caused by the overloading and facilitate the integration of more renewable energy. Next slide. Navajo Sun Power Home Solar Project. With this project, just to back up, Navajo communities, although they have some of the best solar resources in the country, a significant portion of Navajo Nation homes don't have reliable access to electricity for essential services like refrigeration, medical device usage, and internet access. So this project plans to install 375 kilowatts of solar PV with battery energy storage systems on approximately 75 off-grid Navajo Nation homes that are located far from the grid and other community structures. That's delayed electric service to many of these homes. The PV and battery systems would allow homeowners to participate in Navajo Nation and Indian health services programs that subsidize other home improvements which require electricity. Next slide, please. The new Stoyahawk solar battery rural villages in this remote region of Southwest Alaska face unique challenges, being isolated from major road and power systems. So the Alaska Village Electric Cooperative aims to construct 500 kilowatt solar PV array, a 540 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system, and a microgrid controller, leveraging the abundant summer daylight hours to produce energy for 2 remote indigenous communities. So the clean energy generated here will displace nearly a quarter of the fuel consumption at the existing diesel power plant that serves these communities. Next slide, please. The Uzinki Independent Power Energy Improvement Project seeks to construct 160 kilowatt solar PV and 210 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system for a new microgrid in the remote Alaska Native village, offering reliable, resilient backup power during severe weather outages. So these technologies represent a cost-effective and low-maintenance renewable energy option for this community of about 128 indigenous residents who fish, hunt, and pick berries for sustenance and need electricity from modern refrigeration of these resources to last them throughout the off-season. Next slide, please. Permanent, high-quality, clean energy access for rural indigenous communities project, as I mentioned before, about the Navajo communities having the best solar resources in the country, but lacking access to electric grid. This project, too, will install 568 kilowatts of solar PV and about 1,800 kilowatt hours of battery energy storage systems and approximately 350 off-grid homes across Navajo Nation. So about 140 of those economically vulnerable homes would receive services at a reduced rate, enabling residents to access high-quality, zero-carbon electricity. Next slide. The Rivali Electric Community Storage Project aims to install a battery energy storage system at the Woodside substation, which serves 2 communities that are subject to extreme winter weather and wildfire risks. The system will provide clean backup power during outages to the responding volunteer fire departments, as well as local schools used as a community shelter. And this also will reduce the high demand charges on residents' bills. Next slide. Reliability and cost effectiveness in rural areas using environmentally sound practices project aims to improve grid reliability in 3 counties by addressing 2 critical issues: inefficient fuses and vegetation management. So the fuses will be replaced with self-restoring reclosers, which will better protect utility equipment from electric overload and short circuit damage, and could reduce outages by nearly 80%. This project will also strategically clear unwanted vegetation along the power lines right away and replant the area with native species, creating sustainable habitats for local wildlife and potentially saving $50,000 in annual maintenance costs. Next slide, please. The Randolph Electric Membership Corporation transmission line rebuild. So with this project, particularly in areas facing economic distress, access to reliable, affordable, and resilient energy is critical to community revitalization. So with this grant, the REMC Membership Corps will replace 21 miles of deteriorating wooden transmission poles with galvanized steel poles in 4 central North Carolina communities. So the existing poles have been damaged by wildfire and other natural hazards, and their upgrades will improve infrastructure durability and longevity. Next slide. The rural rebuild and reconductor, with that project, the Monongahela Power Company plans to rebuild more than 23 miles of aged power distribution lines and connect 2-mile tie lines with the Petersburg substation. So these upgrades will increase grid reliability and resilience for 3,000 customers in 3 counties of rural West Virginia. So this project's high voltage lines will enable the power company to restore service faster after an outage. And I think this will be our last project. Next slide. Tanacross Solar PV and top battery energy storage system plans to install 1.5 megawatts of solar PV on the grid at Alaska Power telephone power plant that provides electricity to federally recognized tribes in Tanacross, Tetlin, and Dot Lake. So this project is expected to displace more than 125,000 gallons of diesel fuel per year, improving air quality and reducing noise pollution in local communities. And this could also generate more than $380,000 of annual revenue for the Tanana Chiefs Conference to cover operations and maintenance costs. Next slide. So I'll briefly cover the next steps in our process. Next slide. So this somewhat busy slide illustrates the path of engagement from when a project applies for OSED, applies to OSED for competitive funding to when it's awarded and moves through the project management lifecycle. So as I shared before, we're only at the very beginning with negotiations, and that part can take a few months. So the projects have already been selected for the negotiation of awards. You can find project summaries, which include a summary of initial community benefits plans in the application on our website, which was shared earlier in the chat. And then there are concrete ways where you can get involved, including reaching out to our project teams or OSED directly. We've just wrapped up our virtual community briefings last week, but those recordings will be added to the site within the next week. And as I mentioned before, DOE does consider information learned during those briefings, any correspondence and meetings to inform our negotiations process. So for projects that successfully get through negotiations and receive funding and an award, there will be additional ways for you to get involved with those projects. Next slide. Additionally, all projects receiving financial assistance from DOE must be reviewed under the National Environmental Policy Act to ensure that every project gives proper consideration to the environmental effects before it is awarded. So we have additional information for NEPA on our website. And again, you can link to all of these from the link that was dropped earlier. Next slide. So we want to be sure that you can reach OSED with any questions or concerns by using the email that's shown there on the screen. As I mentioned before, community and stakeholder voices are heard throughout this process, and we look forward to hearing more perspectives. So if you aren't already, please sign up to receive OSED news and updates. This will keep you updated about future funding opportunities, including with ERA. There's still about half of the funding left. So out of what I've already mentioned, we still have an additional funding opportunity that will come out later this year. Next slide. So that's it. Thank you again for the invite, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Tikwa. We have 2 brief questions for you. First question, who is the target audience for ERA funding? State agencies, municipalities, nonprofits, or rural businesses?
All of the above, and you'll see in some of the projects as you take a look that many of them are combinations that came after funding, but some of them fell in each of the categories that you listed there, including some local communities and tribes.
Thank you. Next question. My organization has been looking to conduct a literature review of community benefits agreements. Are OSED or other agencies willing to share or disseminate CBAs for others to learn or develop more inclusive strategy agreements?
Yes, so some of that information we do share on the website, and I can also get your email address just so you have it specifically or with the follow-up, but a lot of those are shared on our site.
Thank you. And actually, we do have one more additional question. OSED has dispersed 378 million so far of the 1 billion. And intends to disperse the remaining funding through a similar process as the previous two iterations. Is that correct?
We have not determined yet what the funding will look like, so I can't say if it will be a grant or cooperative agreement. But yes, there will be another round of funding that will be released that could be any of the two or combination. Just it hasn't been defined yet.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation will come from Tunanzin Carmona from the Department of or U.S. Treasury rather, and she'll be talking about elective pay and direct pay.
Hello. Well, thank you everyone who's still sticking around, especially to talk about tax credits of all things. I promise you it's riveting. I saw someone in the Q&A ask if we could elaborate on direct pay tax credits. So here we are. I also know that this is one of the great things about a webinar. If you're able to and you need to, feel free to take a stretch as I chat. I promise this information will be helpful, useful. We'll make sure to send this out also after. And I'll also direct folks to links that could be helpful, even if you're not trying to, catch all of this in one time. Next slide. All right, so I just, being from Treasury, we always have some ground rules, a disclaimer for you all. I'm not a tax attorney, so anything in this, presentation, we're not trying to, is not itself tax guidance. I cannot offer tax advice, and so as the questions come and they get specific to certain projects, I may or may not be able to answer, but I'll do my best to be able to direct you to FAQs and guidance. A lot of this presentation is itself based on tax guidance on irs.gov. And so if you do have any follow-up questions, I would direct you there as well. Next slide. All right, so obviously we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. The Inflation Reduction Act had at EPA, talked about how it was, a historic investment, one of the largest investments in clean energy in United States history. GGRF was one example of that investment, but again, much of that investment is also delivered via tax incentives. And that's actually why the Treasury Department, is playing a big role in administering this part of the IRA, and it's administering the tax code, and it's proud of doing so and playing that central role in implementing the IRA's clean energy tax credit incentives. And a lot of those incentives, cover a broad range of activities that support building a clean energy economy. And one of the important provisions, the game-changing provisions that came out of this was also elective pay. That's the formal term, but colloquially we talk about it as direct pay. And that's a novel tax credit delivery mechanism created by the IRA. And so that'll be the main topic of today's presentation. Next slide. So what is it? What is elective pay? So obviously, for the longest time, when it came to clean energy tax credits, for the most part, the folks and the organizations that were able to take advantage of it were, private sector companies, because they file for taxes. And so they're able to take advantage of a tax credit. And so if you're a tax exempt entity, you're not necessarily filing for taxes. And so, you don't necessarily benefit from a lot of tax credits. And so when the IRA offered to expand a lot of tax credits, they included in there the elective pay provision, which essentially allows tax exempt and government entities to, for the first time, be able to receive a payment equal to the full value of tax credits for building qualifying clean energy projects or making qualifying investments. And so another way to think about it, if you're part of a tax exempt entity, you are able, and you build a qualifying clean energy project and you meet the requirements of the filing process, then you're able to get a direct payment back. And so what we kind of talk about is, how do you do this? What are the things to think about? Who qualifies, et cetera. And so that'll be like the bulk of this presentation, is that what is what is elective pay? What is it in high level terms? And we think about it as a mechanism that enables you to take advantage of these tax credits. So next slide. So how does it work? So under the final rules, there were a series of applicable entities for elective pay. And so, that's tax exempt organizations, that's local governments. When we talk about tax exempt organizations, practically speaking, that's nonprofits. That can be churches and synagogues. When we talk about local governments, that also includes county governments. We're talking about Indian tribal governments and their subdivisions, Alaska Native corporations, the Tennessee Valley Authority. If you want the full list, I definitely recommend you go to irs.gov. But the idea is tax exempt, who does that, who would that benefit? And so starting to think through, if you're a state and local government, yes, it could be your government unit itself, but it could also be maybe sister agencies, other school districts, and then for nonprofits, also thinking about maybe, what you want to build in your community. And so that's not just your organization, but say churches in the area. And so I think I share this only to say is the opportunity is vast, and that there are actually a lot of different entities that do apply and can take advantage of elective pay. So next slide. All right, so then you have the applicable entities. And so what are the credits then? There are a dozen credits, and this is just one section of the credits. But I would say they typically fall under 4 categories. You have energy generation and carbon capture. So this would be the slide that highlights that. But there's also credits that fall under vehicles, there's manufacturing, there's fuels. And a lot of times when it comes to thinking about clean energy projects, the first place folks want to start is by looking at the tax credits, which yes, go ahead, do that. That information is on our website. irs.gov/elective pay is also a quick way to get this. The most popular credit, or the folks know about, it would be the production tax credit for electricity from renewables. And that would be for eligible renewable sources such as wind, biomass, geothermal, solar, small irrigation, landfill and trash, hydropower. But then there's also the investment tax credit for renewable energy projects, including fuel cell, solar, geothermal, small wind, energy storage, biogas, microgrid controllers, and then combined heat and power properties. That can seem like a lot. Again, that's just okay, now, so trying to wrap your head around, that's a lot of opportunities. And so what I say is maybe, in addition to taking a look at the dozen or so tax credits, it's also worth maybe taking a step back if you're, say, a state, county, or local government, looking at existing capital projects that you had planned, or if you have sustainability or climate action plans, maybe not, but maybe things that your local government had been thinking about that maybe didn't pencil out before, now might, with a combination of tax credits, grants, loans, which I'll get into. But just giving you different ways to think about how to approach taking advantage of the tax credits. Next slide. So here's the other set. These would be the ones that fall under manufacturing, vehicles, and fuels. Next slide. Okay, so then what types of projects might be eligible for elective pay? So a lot of my job is going out to local governments all across the country, either setting up calls one-on-one, which, if you're interested, always happy to do. I'd essentially walk you through the same information, but if there's some other agency that is interested in this information, please do let us know. Sometimes, it'll be a local government talks to us, but what they really they want to connect us to, say, their school districts or their community colleges, that would also be eligible. So we're always happy to do that. But when we talk to local governments, especially, the first thing we say is like, well, local governments have a lot of buildings. They also have a lot of vehicles. And decisions around the way that you power, heat, and cool those buildings has a direct impact on cost, climate, and a community's environment. Then you also have vehicles. The way that you fuel your vehicles also has a direct impact on costs, climate, and a community's environment. And so those are definitely two places to be able to look. And so a lot of, governments that have been thinking about, say, replacing their existing vehicles with clean vehicles as part of a fleet transition, may be able to take advantage of the direct pay and those tax credits in particular. Or if maybe you're currently not generating clean energy for your government facilities, that's another place to do so. I think in summary, the way to look at direct pay is it's a powerful new financial tool to make necessary investments to achieve goals related to the clean energy transition, such as improved health outcomes, reduced reliance on the grid, and potential cost savings. Next slide. So here we kind of walk through like a few potential use cases just to get you, like wrap your head around some of the specifics. So kind of going from the very technical tax credit to, okay, so then what can I actually use this for? And especially when it comes to cost savings. And so maybe your goal is you want to achieve fleet cost savings. So one example project could be to replace existing, municipal vehicle fleet with new electric vehicles and associated charging infrastructure. So then you look at the relevant tax credits and, you can get up to $7,500 per light vehicle, or up to $40,000 per larger vehicle, or up to 30% credit on investment in eligible EV charging equipment. And so obviously you would want your team to take a look at all of this, but this is just to kind of get you through, like, first, like, what is your goal? What could be a project that qualifies? And then start to look at the relevant tax credits. Another example goal could be maybe community resilience. And so an example project would be to install microgrid with solar and energy storage to serve critical infrastructure and community facilities during emergencies and grid outages. So relevant tax credits, you could take a look. You may be able to get 6% to 50% credit on investment in solar, storage, and microgrid controllers. And then maybe the last one, the goal would be community heating. So the project could be to develop a central geothermal system to provide heating to community buildings and residential households. So then you look at the relevant tax credits, and it would be 6% to maybe 50% credit on investment in geothermal energy property. So these are just potential use cases. By no means is this the only set of use cases, but just kind of, again, wanting to give you all an idea of how some of this might work. Next slide. All right, so how then does this, enable you to achieve that cost savings? So obviously, there's the tax credit, the value of that tax credit, and there's the base amount. But another key benefit to, the IRA was that, it included certain requirements and bonuses that may affect the amount of elective pay applicable tax credits. So the 4 bonuses and requirements to keep in mind would be the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, the domestic content bonus, the energy communities bonus, and the low-income communities bonus credit program. So for the prevailing wage apprenticeship requirements, that would be, say, for a number of the tax credits created or modified by the IRA, the credit amount is increased by 5 times for projects that meet requirements for paying prevailing wages and using registered apprentices. So let's say, you're building a clean energy project and using like the investment tax credit. And so the basis would be like 6% of the value of the cost of that project. If you build that project meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, that 6% can all of a sudden jump to 30%. It jumps 5 times. And so all of a sudden, a project that, maybe didn't make a lot of sense may now with the combination of that 30%. But then it's also worth looking at the other bonuses, which you can stack. So let's say then you decide to build your project in an energy community. And so an energy community in this case would be areas with close coal mines or coal-fired power plants, or maybe brownfield sites. So let's say then you build your project, you meet the prevailing wage requirements. So then your 6% grew to 30%. Then all of a sudden you're building it in an energy community. So then that you get an extra 10%. And so, yeah, you can go from 6 to 30 to 40. But maybe, you know, it wasn't an energy community. You wanted to build it in a low income community and you met the requirements to be able to get that bonus. So that's also another 10%, or, you know, 20% to certain applicable credits that are part of the investment tax credit for certain facilities. So anyway, all that to say, it's worth sifting through the different bonuses. I think for the low income bonus, you do have to submit a separate application, but it's really helpful to start thinking through, you know, as you're looking at projects. Sure, there's the tax credit itself, which is itself is a huge benefit in terms of you being able to receive a direct payment for that tax credit value. But projects can truly pencil out when you start to apply the different bonuses, and you can start to create a capital stack. And so speaking of capital stacks, next slide. You can also use elective pay with grants and loans. So the elective pay final rule includes a special provision that would enable entities to combine grants and forgivable loans with tax credits. So if an investment related credit property is funded by a tax-free grant or forgivable loan, entities would get the same value of eligible tax credit as if the investment were financed with taxable funds, provided the credit plus the restricted tax exempt amounts do not exceed the cost of the investments. And so let's say you do a combination of tax credits plus the grants and loans, and you know, it's either that combination is under the amount of the full cost of the project, then you can get the full value of the tax credit. But and you could also build it out such that the combination of the tax credits, grants, and loans pays for 100% of the project. That's also a possibility. But you can't do a combination of tax credits, grants, and loans to get more than the cost of the project. So I can provide an example just shortly. Next slide. So actually, I'll provide two examples. So example one, this is the 45W example. Let's say a school district receives a tax exempt grant in the amount of $300,000 to purchase an electric school bus. And that electric school bus is, you know, costs $400,000. So you have like $100,000 gap there. So you have the grant, $300,000, and you got to figure out that $100,000 gap. The beautiful thing, I would say, is that under the IRA, clean commercial vehicles are eligible for a tax credit of up to $40,000. And so then you say, okay, so the school district spaces in the electric bus is $400,000. And then the school district's 45W credit is $40,000. And so then if you're combining the grants plus the tax credit, to be able to pay for the school bus, you essentially just have to make sure you're not exceeding that benefit. And so since the amount of this restricted tax exempt grant plus the amount of the section 45W credit, so together it's the 300 plus 40,000, is less than the cost of the electric school bus, which was 400,000, then the school district's 45W credit is not reduced. And so that's a way that you can take advantage of the combo of the grants plus the tax credits. Example two, maybe this is now a section 48 ITC investment tax credit. So let's say a higher education institution receives a tax exempt grant in the amount of $2 million to install a solar farm on its main campus. And, you know, the institution installs that solar farm for $10 million using that $2 million grant. And then they have $8 million of the institution's unrestricted funds. So under the IRA, the institution is eligible for a section 48 investment tax credit for its investment in the solar farm. The base credit is 6%. But because the institution has met prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, and the solar farm is located in an energy community, that ITC credit is enhanced to 40%. So as I was kind of talking about, that 6% grows 5 times to 30% because of the prevailing wage requirements, but then it can be enhanced another 10% because it was an energy community. And so that's how you can get your ITC credit rate to be enhanced to 40%. So now the institution's basis on the solar farm, which, was $10 million, and the institution's ITC credit is $4 million. And because the amount of the restricted tax exempt grant, the $2 million grant, plus the amount of the credit, which is 4 million. So 2 million plus 4 million is 6 million. So 6 million is less than the cost of the solar farm, 10 million. The institution's ITC credit is not reduced due to the grant. And so these are just 2 examples. Again, we'll share the slides after so you can kind of dig through those. Next slide. So in addition to reducing, those costs or overall costs for a project, it's also worth thinking about how renewable energy, clean energy projects might be able to reduce ongoing or long-term costs. And so thinking, for example, about municipal fleet electrification, in Arizona, 10 of the largest municipalities looked at electrifying their fleets. They did so, and right now they're estimating about $80 million savings over 10 years for doing so. Maybe your project is a solar microgrid. And so that's where you can look at Havasu Lake, California, where, they saw that 50% they could, the Chippewa Indian tribe community has a community center, and they decided, or they found that 50% they could achieve 50% savings in annual electricity bills, plus resilience benefits for installing, a solar storage and microgrid system. Then there's the central geothermal heating example, where in Ball State University, they wanted to replace their aging coal boilers heating system for their college campus to maybe a central geothermal heat pump replace system. And so they estimate at least an annual savings of over 2 million. And so it's again worth taking a step back, thinking about what are the goals, what are the things that our organization needs, our facilities need, our vehicles need, are we trying to achieve savings for something that we absolutely need now? Are we trying to achieve long-term savings? These are all the types of questions that, tax exempt entities should ask themselves. Next slide. So how do you do it? How do you claim elective pay, elective payments? So first, obviously, identify and pursue the qualifying project or activities. So you'll need to know what applicable credit you intend to earn and use direct pay for. And again, how do you identify? How do you pursue? That's going to vary from place to place, organization to organization. But you have a lot of options. You can start with the tax credits. You can start at looking at your capital projects. You can start at, the goals that you have for your organization. It varies. But once you do that, you identify and you start to pursue it. Then you start the next phase, which is you want to complete your project and place it into service. Then you want to determine your tax year, if not already known, to determine when your tax return will be due. And this is really important, especially for tax exempt entities that didn't necessarily have to file before. I'll go into that, but determining your tax year is important. There's also a lot of information around it in our FAQs on elective pay as well. But after you determine your tax year, you complete the pre-filing registration with the IRS after earning the underlying credit. And then you file your tax return by the due date or extended due date and make a valid direct pay election. Then you receive payment after the return is processed. Next slide. All right, so then determining your tax year. So obviously this is a question that a lot of commenters wanted clarification around. And so the final rules essentially permit taxpayers when filing an initial Form 990T to adopt a taxable year based upon a calendar or a fiscal year. provided that such entity maintains adequate books and records, including a reconciliation of any differences between its regular books of account and its chosen taxable year to support making an elective payment election on the basis of its chosen taxable year. And again, this information is in our FAQs, but just to give an example, next slide. So let's say, this would be, we'll just say a town as described below can choose to file Form 990T for 2023 using a calendar tax year, enabling it to make an elective pay election with respect to an applicable credit property, regardless of when it was placed in service during that calendar year 2023. Again, this would apply to, say, like a town that has no federal income tax return requirements under Section 6011 of the code and no federal return requirements under 6033 a of the code, but is filing Form 990T for the sole purpose of using elective pay. But just to get to the example, let's say the town's fiscal year begins on July 1st and ends June 30th. And the town places an applicable credit property in service on April 1st, 2023. And the town then decides to complete its pre-filing registration and chooses to adopt a calendar year tax year for purposes of Section 6417. It maintains its adequate books and records. And so then the town would be required to file their 2023 Form 990T on a calendar year basis to claim the credits on the applicable credit property placed in service on April 1st, 2023. Next slide. All right, so the last, key point, and I started alluding to this during the presentation, the role of local government. There's, a way for local governments. If you're in the audience, I did see like there was a mayor in the audience, but, there is the ability to do the direct projects from government, either, looking at your buildings, your vehicles, etc. But then there's also, worth considering, the broader economic development strategies around the clean energy transition, or maybe the role of promoting consumer and business transition to clean energy. I think for tax exempt entities too, it's also worth thinking about what kind of ecosystem do we want to build? Do folks want to build around direct pay, clean energy? Are there learnings that could be shared, etc.? This is a brand new mechanism. The tax credits have been around for a while, but the direct pay mechanism is brand new. So there is still, a lot of questions. There are still a lot of questions. There are a lot of folks that are navigating this, but, there's potential soon to have some best practices to be able to share across the board. And, we ourselves are trying to collect those so that once we have them, other folks are able to navigate some of these processes. But what I would say is, different places are at different stages of utilizing the direct pay mechanism. You had the early adopters and the pre-adopters. You also have the planners. But right now, a lot of folks are in that beginning stage, and that's perfectly fine because, like I said, this is brand new. But we have a lot of resources that are worth digging into to start to think about, how do we move from that beginning phase to that planning phase and so forth. So next slide. So I'll just leave you with this. I referenced some of these already in the presentation. IRS.gov/elective pay is a fantastic resource that you can also find the pre-filing registration user guide. We have how-to videos, the permission management user guide. The FAQs are phenomenal. So chances are that if you have a question, someone else has already had that question. So I definitely recommend looking at that. Another resource is cleanenergy.gov/direct pay. You can also subscribe to the IRS newsletter. I will say the IRS has been wonderful about hosting office hours as well. So if you have some questions, that's also another place to be able to go. And if you want more information on the Inflation Reduction Act, there's obviously the whitehouse.gov Inflation Reduction Act guidebook. So I'll leave you all with that.
Thank you, Samantha. And we have two questions for you.
Sure.
Are tax credits for community resilience applicable to tribal governments? I'm wondering if there's a benefit of tax credits for a tribal government.
Tax credits for tribal. Well, tribal governments are able to take advantage of direct pay and those tax credits that I outlined.
Great, thank you. And when does Treasury expect to issue final rules on domestic content requirements to qualify for direct pay? And also the rules regarding the waiver process?
I don't have information on dates, but I can sift through to see where we currently are on some of these. I know there was an update around domestic content. I can send that to the hosts
Okay,
because I don't have that on hand, but
great.
it's a great question.
And we will follow up with the person who asked that question. Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation and you taking the time to answer additional questions. And now we will be moving forward and on to John Beeler from USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service to talk more about REAP.
Hey, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is John Beeler. I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator for the Rural Business Cooperative Service. Next slide, please. The Rural Business Cooperative Service is one of 3 sister agencies within the Rural Development Mission area of the United States Department of Agriculture. Next slide, please. Within Rural Business Cooperative Service, one of our main energy programs, our main energy program is the Rural Energy for America program. I'm here to talk to you today about some financing opportunities within that program. Next slide. So the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP program, provides guaranteed loan financing and grant funding to agricultural producers and rural small businesses for renewable energy systems or to make energy efficiency improvements. Grants can cover up to 50% of total eligible project costs, and loan guarantees on loans can cover up to 75% of total eligible project costs. You can combine grant and loan guarantee funding under the REAP program, that is so long as it does not cover more than 75% of total eligible project costs. So with the Inflation Reduction Act that we've all heard about in the past hour and a half, we've increased the grant size to up to 50%. And so you could have, for example, a $1 million total project cost project, $500,000 grant, a $250,000 loan, and you would need to find $250,000 from other non-federal grant sources. So you know, whether that be another private loan or another federally guaranteed loan, third-party equity, or equity from the applicant, there's many ways to cover those matching funds. So next slide, please. Applicant eligibility. When we talk about eligibility of applicants, we're really looking at two main applicant groups. One is agricultural producers, and the other is rural small businesses. So in order to qualify as an agricultural producer, we really need to look at an individual or entity that receives 50% or more of their gross income from agricultural production. Whether that be crops, livestock, aquaculture, forestry operations, nurseries, or dairies, we need to meet that 50% gross income coming from ag operations. Now, does that mean that a agricultural producer that also has a side job or a main job off the farm, are they ineligible for the program? Not necessarily. They can still apply and most likely receive assistance through the rural small business eligibility threshold. So to apply and be eligible under the rural small business eligibility, you need to be a small business as defined by the Small Business Administration and be located in a rural or non-metro area of 50,000 people or less. You can find a handy website or map on our website, rather, that where you can type in your project's address and determine if it is in a rural area or not. So next slide, please. Nonprofit eligibility. In general, nonprofits are not eligible, but there are some exceptions, which include cooperatives, electric utilities, and tribal business entities. And those entities are still required to meet the definition of small business. Also, nonprofit agricultural producers are also eligible to apply, but they would again need to meet the provisions on the previous slide for being an eligible agricultural producer. So next slide, please. When we talk about what kinds of projects are eligible for REAP, again, there's sort of two main tranches that our projects fall into. The first grouping is renewable energy projects, so renewable energy systems. You can see on the slide here what those different systems are and that we've funded in the past. Those include solar, wind, small hydroelectric, which is defined as less than 30 megawatts of small hydroelectric projects, anaerobic digesters, biomass, geothermal, and wave and ocean power. Obviously, we see a majority of solar, starting to see a lot of solar plus storage projects. So a lot of battery energy storage systems, as long as they're tied to a renewable energy system as one project, that can be eligible for the REAP program. Next slide, please. Energy efficiency projects. Again, energy efficiency improvements are eligible, and so long as we're showing a reduction in energy consumption on historical energy bills of the applicant, we can look at the following energy efficiency improvements. So lighting, heating, cooling, ventilation, fans, automated controls, insulation. Those are just some examples. Obviously, if you get an energy audit and that shows energy savings, those different projects identified on that audit can certainly be eligible for the program. So this is not an all-inclusive list here. Next slide, please. Here are some minimums and maximums for the REAP program. In terms of grants, we can do $2,500 for energy efficiency projects on the low side, $5,000 for renewable energy systems, and then on the maximum through IRA, we're able to increase the maximums allowed for energy efficiency and renewable energy systems projects. So up to $500,000 for energy efficiency projects, up to $1 million for renewable energy systems grants. Applicants are able to apply for one energy efficiency improvement and one renewable energy system grant per fiscal year. So assistance to one applicant is not to exceed $1.5 million in total in grants. So again, $500,000 for EEI, $1 million for renewable energy systems or RES. Guaranteed loans, we can do guaranteed loans up to $25 million. Those guaranteed loans, again, can cover up to 75% of project costs, but the guarantee on that loan is going to be for 80% of the total loan. So something to think about there. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit of information on funding and what we have had available up to 2024 and what we're looking at going forward. We have not announced yet through a notice in the Federal Register what 2025 funding will look like, but we do expect something to come out in the summer, and we'll have more information then. But since the start of the Biden-Harris administration, we've done $1.6 billion in grants and loans. $800 million is available in REAP grant funds until 2025. That obviously the slide is slightly outdated, but we are quickly coming up on the end of the 2024 fiscal year. 'Next slide, please. Here are some minimums and maximums for the REAP program. In terms of grants, we can do $2,500 for energy efficiency projects on the low side, $5,000 for renewable energy systems projects. So the best way to get in touch with us, if you want to find out more information, depending on where your project is located, please contact your USDA Rural Development state office or state energy coordinator. A list of those offices is located on that first link. And then your state-based USDA Rural Development Energy Coordinator can also answer questions. Again, I'm a regional coordinator, so I cover the Northeast, which is Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and on up to Maine. We have other regional coordinators, Deb Yoakum in the South, covering everywhere from Florida up all the way to Oklahoma. In the Midwest, Tanya Mosley, and in the West, Brenda Heinen. So we have regional coordinators and state energy coordinators that can help answer your questions. We also put out 2 rounds of technical assistance grants that were made available to entities that can help our renewable energy systems and energy efficiency improvements applicants to create or generate applications, helping them with everything on the front end from energy audits, renewable energy site assessments, application development, things such as SAM registrations, all sorts of renewable energy site assessments and the like. So there's a list of those technical assistance providers also available at the website there, and would encourage you to look on there, see who has the capability to assist, and if their renewable energy technologies or energy efficiency improvements match up with the projects that you're thinking of. So next slide, please. So I guess I'll turn it back over to Alex. Alex, thank you.
Thank you, John. And we have one question for you. How long will REAP grant be at 50%?
That's a good question. We have not come out with a notice yet for 2025, but we have no indication that that those grants will fall back to 25% as authorized in our regulation. If we were not to come out with a notice this summer, then they would go back to 25%. But again, we're not planning on anything like that for the time being.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate your time and presentation. And now we will start our very last presentation from Chris McLean on the.
All right. I'm standing all between here and the dismissal bell. So thank you very much. I'm Chris McLean. I'm the assistant administrator of the RUS electric program. So we'll go to the next slide. And we are excited about investing in rural America for clean, affordable, reliable energy. We're as excited as that little girl is, and excited and very pleased with the response we've received from PACE and New ERA. Go to the next slide. Because Inflation Reduction Act, as you have heard this afternoon, not only the Inflation Reduction Act, when you take it all together, including the $10.7 billion that was made available to RUS, plus the $1 billion+ made available to the Rural Business Cooperative Service for REAP, and then the fabulous programs at EPA and Department of Energy, and those tax benefits really make the IRA the greatest investment in rural electrification since the New Deal. And those tax credits are going to go a long way to making a lot of clean power affordable for rural systems. And at RUS, we're delighted to be able to stack our financing with other federal agencies and take full advantage of all tax benefits that are available. But of course, we do have to make sure that that's okay with the other federal agencies, because some statutes have a little more restrictions than others. We try to be as generous as we can in terms of stacking our resources with other federal agencies' resources. Go to the next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about the Rural Electrification Act program. That's the program we've been administering since 1935, when President Roosevelt created our Rural Electrification Administration, our predecessor agency, by executive order, and a year later, Congress created the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, which allows us to provide direct loans at Treasury rates of interest and FFB loan guarantees from the Federal Financing Bank, an arm of the Department of Treasury, at an interest rate close to Treasury, which is Treasury plus an eighth. And then we have a small grant program, although we don't have an open funding window this fiscal year, that has already closed, called the High Energy Cost Grant Program. And then we can provide a whole host of clean energy financing through our regular loan programs. And that also can be, we can do business with developers who are using PPAs to sell clean power to rural electric utilities. So there's a link here on this page where you can link to the RUS electric program loan programs. We'll go to the next slide. So on our rural utility service infrastructure loans, it's available to all rural utilities, whether you're a co-op, you're an investor-owned utility, you're a municipal utility, a tribal utility, as long as you're serving eligible rural communities. And in general, that would be communities that do not exceed 20,000 people for the infrastructure loan. However, there's a lot of footnotes, so please check with us. If you're a former or current or former borrower, you actually may be grandfathered in to whatever population limit you may have, have in your existing community. But the interest rates are either at or near Treasury rates of interest. If it's for a renewable project, we have the opportunity to offer Treasury rates of interest. And those Treasury rates of interest are set at the time that you draw funds from the agency. Our core program in rural electrification infrastructure loans have been around $5+ billion each and every year. Last year, all of our lending, direct and indirect, was like $6.8 billion of investment. We do about 100 projects a year prior to the IRA coming our way. We can offer up to 35 years financing based on the useful life of the asset or the leased property that might underlie a renewable project, or 35 years, whichever is shorter, or the power purchase agreement, which supports that asset, whichever is shorter. And we do have to be in a first lien position or shared first lien position, but we can use many different security instruments to be able to secure the federal government's loans. It could be a mortgage, it can be an indenture if you're a G&T, or if you're a municipal utility, it could be a pledge of revenues, or maybe a tribal utility on a pledge of revenues. And we will finance anything that an electric utility serving eligible rural communities needs to be able to deliver electricity. It can be generation, the production of power, transmission, the movement of that power across large voltage lines, distribution, taking that power from the transmission lines to the substation to your home, energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy projects, smart grid technologies. All of those, if you need it to deliver electricity to rural areas, they are very likely potentially eligible for RUS financing, as well as physical protections to protect the security of the grid. We also have renewable energy project loans that are available for developers. There's two kinds of loans that we offer. One is called a system loan. Those would be for electric utilities that give us a lien on all of the assets, all of their operations. So we're very, very secured of the electric system, and project loans where we just have a lien on the project assets and revenues of that system. The difference is if you are a system borrower, in other words, a utility that has given us first lien or shared first lien on your assets, you have the opportunity to finance up to 100% of the project costs, and you also can finance in certain cases during construction. Whereas for a project loan, we can finance up to 75% of the project cost, and we would not release funds until the project is completed. So we would not take construction risk for project loans where we would be willing on a system loan, assuming that the applicant is financially able to make those payments. And then we have a very interesting relending program, which is focused on energy efficiency, but it also covers on-grid, off-grid renewable energy. Now, this is a relending program, much the way the Rural Business Cooperative Service has the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Funds. We will lend loans at RUS funds at 0% interest to our borrower. That could be a utility, or it could be a green bank or an other utility-like energy efficiency entity. They will then relend that money at an interest rate no higher than 5% to their consumer for energy efficiency or clean energy investments that would go behind the meter, including things like charging stations. So it's a fabulous relending program, advances energy efficiency and clean energy, and who can beat 0% interest? It's a pretty good deal. Now, we have a very small program that is the grant program in the electric, RUS Electric, called High Energy Cost Grants. The funding window for this fiscal year is closed, so stay tuned for what Congress does in the next fiscal year, but it is focused on usually lower income areas which very high energy costs, and it is competitively awarded. The threshold defined in the statute is that the community must have energy costs 275% above the national average. Now, this is a program that was designed by the late Senator Ted Stevens from Alaska, so it should surprise nobody that most of the money in this program tends to go to places like Alaska or Hawaii or the Pacific Islands, or occasionally tribal awardees, or occasionally the Atlantic Islands in off the coast of the United States. Congress typically gives us $8 million a year, except this last year, Congress was less than typical and gave us only $8 million. Hence, we are kind of struggling to be able to make that, stretch out that funding among the applicants of very good projects that we had in the High Energy Cost Grant Program. But stay tuned. If Congress provides appropriations for next fiscal year, there could be more opportunities to apply for High Energy Cost Grant funding. We'll go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the Rural Energy Savings Program is a relending program. It can be used for a whole host of customer side of the meter investments in lighting and HVAC and building envelope improvements, or on-grid, off-grid renewable energy, for EV charging stations. If the consumer wants to own that, be a residential consumer, a business, a university, a government office, if the ratepayer wants to own the EV charging station, the utility can borrow money from us at 0%, relend it to their customer for the charging station. The customer pays them back through on-bill financing, and that's how you'll be able to finance a charging station. And we can even finance whole manufactured home replacements. In rural America, there are a lot of manufactured homes, what some people might call trailer homes, which are just beyond the ability to retrofit to make them energy efficient. So it is possible to use this money, and one of our borrowers out in the Pacific Northwest is in fact doing that. They're using our program under the Rural Energy Savings Program to help people replace their manufactured homes with new energy efficient manufactured homes. It's a big project to be able to do that, but it is clearly eligible, and one that we are watching very closely. It provides some really excellent opportunities to be able to help your community while you also save energy and improve quality of life for your consumers. The essential elements to the Rural Energy Savings Program is that it must be a relending relationship. So 0% interest from RUS to the borrower. The borrower then relends it to a ratepayer. That ratepayer then pays back through on-bill financing. So that's the second essential element. You must have a on-bill financing repayment to the consumer. Now, that refinancing mechanism can be through a typical consumer loan. It can be through a tariff that you as the utility place as an energy efficiency tariff you place on that particular household. And so you don't have to qualify your consumer. It just stays on the meter until the indebtedness is paid. Or if your case of a municipal utility, could be in the form of property tax or PACE financing. And so any energy efficiency investments are eligible. So we'll go to the next slide. Oh, and REST, by the way, has a more generous population limit. So we can go up to communities up to 50,000. And then in some cases, we have appropriations language that says that if one part of your service territory is eligible, we could actually help you design a program that would serve your entire service area, even including non-rural entities. Although there has to be a meaningful rural component to your RESP project. All right, let's talk to Grid Security Division. It is the newest portion of the newest organization in the RUS electric program. Let me put it that way. We created the Grid Security Division following the 2018 Farm Bill, which gave us very clear authority to be able to finance grid security, cybersecurity, physical security, and fire prevention needs of utilities. So if it advances grid security, we will consider it for financing, including things like emergency vehicles, cyber software, fire prevention, vegetation management, drones, security systems, remote monitoring systems. So if you need it to be able to protect your grid, protect your physical or cyber security, please let us know. Even if it would otherwise be considered operating expenses, this is something that we definitely would be willing to consider to be able to finance, because we do realize how vulnerable the grid is to both man-made and natural disasters, as we found out, frankly, this weekend with very bad weather across great parts of our country. So anything we can do to strengthen the grid and enhance its reliability and resiliency and recovery is something that we would certainly consider to finance as part of grid security. We'll go to the next slide. So what we would like folks to do is think about how you can take some of the information you learned today to be able to combine, for example, the direct pay tax incentives or some of the other infrastructure investment incentives we heard from our colleagues in other federal agencies, and combine them with the RUS loan programs, or the Rural Energy Savings Program, or the REAP program, or tribal programs. We want to be able to help you do what you need to be able to get your clean energy visions across the finish line, even though at the RUS, most of our IRA money is very close to being claimed. But I also want to bring a point to the group, is that we are in the final stages of our new era, the new Empowering Rural America program, of the final stages of the competition for New Era. And if you are in the business of producing renewable energy, there still are opportunities for you to engage with finalists. And unfortunately, I'm not in a position to be able to tell you who the finalists are, but I think those of you in the business might know who some of the finalists are. But it is still possible, for, as they are putting together their projects for the final stage of the competition, there are opportunities to market power purchase agreements for clean energy to some of those finalists. So that is another angle for you to think about to be able to tap in to some of the tremendous benefits that have been made available to rural electric systems and particularly rural cooperatives under the new IRA program. All right, so there you go. Thank you very much. I think that's the last slide that I have. Yes, if
Thank
you
you
have
very
any questions. Yes, so Joe Baden, by the way, is the head of our loan origination program. And if you have not had any relationship with RUS, he would be a very good first point of contact. We start with a letter of interest process, so you can send a letter. Joe would be your main point of contact to be able to get started with an RUS loan. If you need anything else, also, you can always contact me, christopher.mclean@usda.gov. So thank you very much, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you.